management. So this is briefly what I have prepared for today. First, we'll be talking about leaks. Then we'll be talking about fistulas, and then we'll move on to recent advances in endoscopy techniques. So starting with what is an anastomotic leak? An anastomotic leakage should be defined as a defect of the intestinal wall at the anastomotic site, leading to a communication between the intra and extraluminal compartments. So radiologically, we can see that anastomotic leak has contrast extravasation into the peritoneal cavity after doing a CCT or an upper GI series. The term GI leak includes both anastomotic as well as stapler leaks. So coming to some of the GI leaks we encounter in bariatric surgery, they're regarded as one of the most dreaded complications following bariatric surgery because of the difficulty in diagnosing them. And literature suggests that there is a morbidity of 61% and a mortality of 15%. So it is usually regarded as an early complication following bariatric surgery. It can present as early as post-op day 1 to even months after surgery. So in this regard, they are divided into acute, early, and late leaks. Acute leak is something which presents within 1 week. Early leak is between 1 to 6 weeks, and late leak is more than 6 weeks. And let us take a look at the incidence. Post sleeve gastrectomy, the incidence is 1 to 3%. Following MGB, it is 0.1 to 1.9%. And RYGB, it is 0.6 to 4.4%. The difficulty in diagnosis is related to non-specific symptoms and the limitation or the less sensitivity of the radiological studies. So the location of the leaks, first we have a picture of sleeve gastrectomy. In sleeve gastrectomy, the most common site of leak is towards the proximal part of the neogastric tube near the G junction. But essentially it can occur anywhere along the stapler line. The second picture is that of an MGB. Here we can see there is a long slender stomach tube. It is usually a high pressure system with decreased compliance and a long staple line. So the most common site of leakage is the staple line, followed by the GG anastomotic site. The third one is an RYGB. Again here the most common site of leakage is the GG anastomotic site, followed by the gastric remnant, followed by the JJ anastomosis. There are some implicated and definitive risk factors associated with leaks. So some definitive factors are blood supply, the tension on the suture line if the tissue is not adequately mobilized, the location on the GI tract, some local factors like sepsis, fluid collection, and post-radiotherapy, inflammatory diseases like Crohn's disease, TB, etc. And some of the implicated factors are in bariatric surgery. Two important factors are malnutrition and obesity, male gender, smoking, steroid therapy, chemotherapy, stapler related factors like forceful extraction, tears caused by the anvil organ, or the failure of the stapler to close, etc. These are implicated factors. Coming to the symptoms, the ones I have highlighted in red are the most common symptoms. They're seen in up to 90% of the patients. They present with persistent tachycardia with a heart rate of more than 120 beats per minute, fever with chills and rigor, and also diffuse abdominal pain. Some less common symptoms are chest pain, shortness of breath, fluid leakage from the incision site, nausea, vomiting, pain in the shoulder tip areas, low BP, decreased urine output, or a generalized feeling of discomfort. Coming to the diagnosis and treatment. So I told that it can present as early as post-op day 1 to even months after surgery. But studies show that the median day of presentation is 9th day post-operatively. And we should have a strong clinical suspicion when the patient presents with fever, abdominal pain, and tachycardia. So first we see the BP of the patient. If the patient is hemodynamically stable, it is wise to rule out other causes of tachycardia like post-op bleeding, hypovolemia, pneumonia. So for this, we can do a CBC where we can see the hemoglobin and TLC of the patient. We can also do a chest X-ray to see for patches developing and also the hydration status of the patient. The preferred modality for diagnosis is an abdominal CT with oral contrast. Here we'll see there is contrast extravasation from the staple line or the anastomotic site. And however, the sensitivity of the test is less. It is 60 to 80% for detection at a GG anastomotic or sleeve gastrectomy site. And not only contrast extravasation, but also the presence of an abscess or a phlegmon or a fluid collection should also be considered as a leak, even if there is no extravasation. The second modality of choice is the upper GI series, barium swallow or a barium weave. But again, it is also less sensitive. It is literature says it is 22 to 75% sensitive. And neither of the study will effectively rule out a leak at the JJ site because it is located far below. And persistent tachycardia, despite negative radiological studies, warrants surgical exploration, even if no other cause can be identified because of the poor sensitivity of both these tests. So on the left, we can see a sleeve gastrectomy. Here we can see contrast extravasation. And towards the right, we can see an endoclip is placed, an endoscopic stent is placed, and the defect is sealed. Coming to the treatment approaches, this is how we have to consider the treatment. The initial management will always be conservative, but conservative management alone has a very high failure rate. So it is often clubbed with endoscopic modality. And in case of failure of an endoscopic technique or a chronic non-healing leak, then we have to look for surgical options. So the initial management approach involves keeping the patient NPO, providing adequate nutritional support as taught as TPN or enteral feeding below the anastomotic site, correcting the electrolyte imbalance, starting the patient on broad spectrum antibiotics, IV crystalloids or blood products in case there is an anemia, put an NG tube to decompress the stomach, and in case of any abdominal wall abscess, it should be drained immediately. In case of a single intra-abdominal abscess, it is wise to do a CT guided or ultrasound guided percutaneous drainage. In case of multiple abscesses, or if the abscess is not drainable, not amenable to percutaneous drainage, an open drainage can be considered. Pelvic abscesses, usually a transrectal or transvaginal approach is preferred. So the endoscopic modality is the preferred modality, except in cases of chronic non-healing leaks. So here I'll be discussing this in detail in the later part of the slide. Here are some of the devices and techniques available: endoclips, endoscopic suturing, endoscopic stents, tissue adhesives and glue, endoscopic vacuum therapy, or endosponge. So when do we re-explore the patient in case of an acute leak? If the patient has diffuse peritonitis or there is presence of intra-abdominal hemorrhage, multiple non-drainable abscesses, suspected bowel ischemia, or major wound disruption or evisceration. In such cases, we should consider opening the patient. So surgery, always laparoscopy, re-laparoscopy is preferred instead of open surgery. A thorough abdominal lavage should be done, an abdominal drain should be placed, and some others prefer the repair of the leak with an omental patch, but usually the tissue would be friable, so it is not always possible. And another alternative is placing a T-tube. So what the T-tube will do is that we are placing the T-tube directly over the defect, and it will create a controlled output, a controlled fistula. And after 4 to 6 weeks, we remove the T-tube and the fistula tract will heal on its own. Feeding jejunostomy can also be considered depending upon the nutritional status of the patient. And persistent leak from a sleeve gastrectomy, it is often wise to consider to convert it into RYGP. And in case of late and non-healing chronic leakage, a proximal gastrectomy can be considered with the Roux-en-Y esophagojejunostomy. So here's a picture. First, we do an intraluminal stenting to cover the leakage site. Here is the T-tube and drainage. Here T-tube is placed directly over the defect and an abdominal drain is placed. So this will create a fistula tract, and after 4 to 6 weeks, we will remove the T-tube. Here it is a chronic non-healing leak, and here we have done a proximal gastrectomy followed by an esophagojejunostomy and jejunojejunostomy for the biliopancreatic. So acute leaks prior to discharge may be optimally managed by surgery. Conservative therapy alone has a very high failure rate, so it is best combined with endoscopic stenting. In case the stenting facility is not available, it would be wise to take the patient up for surgery. It goes without saying that treatment of anastomotic leak starts with prevention. So in order to prevent, we should be careful during the initial surgery. Adequate exposure and mobilization of the tissue, gentle handling of the tissues, aseptic precaution, careful dissection, and correct technical placement of sutures or staples, and preservation of blood supply to the ends of structures to be anastomosed. The second part of the topic is fistulas. And what is a fistula? Fistula represents an abnormal connection between two epithelial surfaces, of which one is a hollow organ. It can be formed anywhere along the alimentary canal from the esophagus to anal canal. So usually it is enteric than gastric. GI fistulas are more commonly acquired than developmental, and in acquired, they are most commonly iatrogenic due to the recent advances in endoscopic and therapeutic procedures. They can also be traumatic, and the least common is spontaneous fistulas. So here's briefly the classification of fistulas. It can be internal, like an intravesical or enteroenteral fistula. It can be external, like an enterocutaneous fistula, or mixed with both components. Simple as in there is only one tract, complex with multiple tracts, multiple fistulous tracts, or an abscess involving it. And based on output, external fistulas are divided into high, low, and intermediate output. High output as in more than 500 ml in 24 hours. Low output with less than 200 ml in 24 hours, or intermediate as in 200 to 500. Coming to the etiology of fistulas, they can be congenital, they can be traumatic fistulas, inflammatory as in Crohn's, TB, neoplastic. They can be due to degenerative diseases, post-irradiation, and our topic of interest is post-operative fistulas. Again, the reason can be tension on the suture line leading to an anastomotic leakage, and chronic as a sequelae we get a fistula. Bowel ischemia, associated sepsis, distal obstruction, or malignancy. Some of the GI fistulas we see in bariatric surgery. It is usually regarded as a late complication after months of surgery. It is usually due to it occurs as a sequelae of a chronic non-healing leak. Gastrogastric fistula is seen in 1.2 to 6% of the patients post RVGV. Here there is a fistulous connection between the gastric pouch and the gastric remnant. And gastropleural fistula post sleeve gastrectomy. It is a very rare entity, but it is a very serious condition. So few words about gastrogastric fistula. The exact mechanism is unknown. Some of the postulated mechanism involves an anastomotic leak or marginal ulcer, perforation of the gastric remnant, gastric tissue migration, or erosion by a foreign body. Most common symptoms include abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, hematemesis. Patients complain with weight regain and refractory ulcers. Again, the diagnostic modality of choice is an upper J series or CT scan with oral contrast. And again, sensitivity is less here, and we can see the fistulous tract and the connections. So it is also preferred to do an esophagogastroduodenoscopy because of the less sensitivity of these tests. And we can also identify the location, exact location, the size, and also presence of a margin also. Coming to the management, again, the initial management is starting the patient on PPI and sucralfate. It is wise to avoid NSAIDs because they increase acid secretion, and this will go on for 6 to 8 weeks. If the patient is H. pylori positive, then start him on antibiotics. If the conservative management fails after 6 weeks, or if the patient regains weight, then we have to consider endoscopic management followed by surgical management. Again, endoscopic repair must be attempted only in select cases to avoid unnecessary interventions and fistula recurrence. It is usually done under general anesthesia. So these are some of the devices we use: endoscopic sutures, endoclips, APC, organ plasma coagulation, fibrin glue. So these modalities I'll be discussing in detail later. In a study conducted by Fernandez Esprach, they did a closure of gastrogastric fistulas using endoscopic modalities. So here they found that the long-term reopening rate was 81% overall, and in fistulas of 20 mm or more, the long-term reopening rate was 100%. So from this, they concluded that endoscopic modalities were useful, but only in cases of small fistulas, and in bigger fistulas, they were not preferred. So surgical management is the standard of care when endoscopy fails. So again, a minimally invasive approach is preferred than an open approach. So what we do is a dissection and transection of fistula with or without interposition of omentum. Some others also prefer to do an remnant gastrectomy, but it is technically more challenging. However, a lower recurrence rate has been reported. Gastropleural fistula, few words. It is an exceedingly rare but life-threatening complication. The signs and symptoms can be misleading and non-specific. So as such, every surgeon should keep a high index of suspicion to identify patients with recurrent respiratory tract infections after respiratory tract infection after bariatric surgery. So again, the management is non-surgical conservative, and very rarely a lower lung lobectomy may be required. So here's a chest X-ray showing picture of a massive left-sided hydropneumothorax as a result of gastropleural fistula, and there is mediastinal shift to the right side. And in the below images, we can see there is a fistulous tract which is communicating between the stomach and the pleural cavity. So coming to the main topic for today, the recent advances in the endoscopic techniques and modalities for treatment of fistulas and leaks. So recently there has been an increased use of laparoscopy and therapeutic endoscopic procedures. So these have also led to an increase in the iatrogenic trauma to the GI tract. So endoscopic closure techniques such as clipping, stenting, suturing, gluing, etc. They are currently the preferred treatment of choice in upper GI leaks and fistulas. So they have provided a more affordable alternative to surgery with less morbidity and resource utilization. The devices and techniques. First, we'll go through endoclips. So here we have some few endoclips. They are currently the most commonly used endoscopic modality. If we include perforations also into account. If you're seeing the three modalities, the three problems, that is perforations, leaks, and fistulas. If we consider all these three together, then endoclips are the most commonly used modality for the treatment. So there are two types of endoclips which are available. They are through the scope clips and over the scope clips. So as the name suggests, through the scope clip, we put the clip inside the endoscope, through the endoscope, and over the scope, the clip is wounded circumferentially around the endoscope. So TTSC is technically less demanding, and it can be used to close defects which are less than 1 centimeter. OTSC can provide full thickness closure, and also it can close larger defects up to 2 centimeter with single application, including those with everted edges. So what are the limitations to this? TTSC is, as I've said, it has a jaw limit. Size of the jaw is limited. Because of that, it is limited to smaller defects, and it also has a propensity for premature dislodgement. And it can also be associated with small amount of leaks due to inadequate sealing, and it also has a longer procedure time, which increases the risk of air leak. And OTSC is technically more challenging because it requires the complete withdrawal of the endoscope in order to mount the clip. And it also has a twin grasper which has to be managed independently, and that requires a lot of technical challenge. And studies have shown that both TTSC and OTSC are highly effective in smaller defects less than 2 centimeter. And they have a technical success rate of 100% and a clinical success rate of 89 to 98%. So endoscopic stents are the secondly most common used modality. But if we do not account for perforations, then the most commonly used modality for upper GI leaks and fistulas is endoscopic stents. So we have variety of stents, self-expanding metallic stent, fully covered metallic stent, partially covered metallic stent, or a self-expanding plastic stent. So fully covered self-expanding metallic stent, they are the most commonly used endoscopic stents for upper GI defects. They have a very less migration risk. So studies have shown a clinical success rate of 76 to 83% for patients undergoing SEMS. SEPS is an alternative to SEMS, and SEPS, as the name suggests, it is made of plastic and it is easily maneuverable. It is more flexible. So as such, it is easy to reposition and remove septs, but it also has a high migration rate owing to its high flexibility. So the major disadvantage of stents is stent migration. Uh, so in order to reduce it, we can place a larger diameter stent, or we can reinforce the stents with endo clips or sutures. And also it also involves a major challenge, that is retrieval of the stent. That is also a major challenge. So coming to the third technique, that is endoscopic suturing. So it is having a variety of application, including stent fixation and closure of larger defects, including fistula and perforation. So in case of endo clips, the major disadvantage was that it was not available for larger defects. So for larger defects, we use endoscopic suture. However, it is technically more demanding because it requires expertise. And in a large multi-center study conducted by Shareha et al., endoscopic suturing was used for stent fixation, closure of fistulas, perforations, etc. And they showed a high technical success rate of 97% and a clinical success rate of 79%. So in the closure of acute fistulas, less than 30 days post-bariatric surgery, they have shown to be highly successful. But in the case of chronic fistulas, post-bariatric surgery, suturing has shown a very low success rate of up to 23%. So this is Overstitch. It is a disposable single-use stitching device which is recently into the market. It can be used to apply continuous or intermittent stitches without the need to even remove the scope for reloading the needles. And in case of suturing, the tissue approximation is facilitated by a retracting device or a grasping forceps. Here's a picture of an endoscopic suture device. Tissue adhesives and glue, fibrin glue or cyanoacrylate, they have been used with success in the closure of anastomotic leaks and the low output fistulas. The glue is applied by a double lumen catheter after removal of any secretion or pus to dry the targeted area, and it forms a fibrin cloak. They can be used alone or in conjunction with other endoscopic modalities like clips. Endoscopic vacuum therapy or endosponge. Endoscopic drainage of extraluminal collection or abscess, they can be managed effectively with an EVT. The technique involves placement of an endosponge at the intraluminal portion of the defect or deep into the surrounding contaminated cavity via an overtube through an endoscope. And the sponge is connected to a vacuum device with a pressure, constant pressure of 125 to 150 millimeter mercury. And through this, the secretions are absorbed and the cavity collapses, and this helps in the evacuation of the cavity. They have shown a successful leak closure of 78 to 94% of the cases. This is argon photocoagulation. It involves use of a jet of ionized argon gas in the plasma state through a probe which is passed through the endoscope. The probe is placed at some distance from the lesion, and argon gas is then emitted, and then it is ionized by a very high voltage of up to 6 kilovolts. And high frequency electric current is then conducted through the gas, and it results in the coagulation of the lesion. So here are some references that I have used for preparing this slide. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Manav. It was a very comprehensive overview of the leaks and fistulas. And you've done a fairly good job. I mean, obviously, you've gone through a lot of stuff. But I wish you had seen the revised list at sent, because I personally prefer very focused topics, especially when I had put only endoscopic management, because we wanted to learn more about that. Because as a bariatric group, we want more and more information about like newer things. So good is for good learning for everybody. But I think the revised list had just the just the endoscopic management. That doesn't take away the credit from your excellent presentation. So the point I just wanted to make about the diagnostics about the leak was that when you say pulse rate of 120 per minute, there are literature which says when the pulse rate starts going above 100, start suspecting a leak.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Point number one. 2 point is whenever you take the round or a bariatric post-op patient, at every visit in your mind or by your evaluation, exclude a leak. Every visit you should think of a leak. Yes, this
Okay.
patient has a leak or no leak. Okay.
Okay.
Third thing is about gastrographin, excuse me, and the CT. Okay, so in
Yes.
our own experience of leaks, uh, we have found that both are complementary. So what we have found is that if CT is normal, uh,
Okay.
and sometimes gastrographin, especially when done in a right lateral position, that means left side down, has given
Okay.
us a small leak can be evident. And the other way around, when we do a gastrographin is normal and a CT, then it may show a small collection, especially with AF foci. Now,
Yes, sir.
the era of when there was no sleeve, this for all of us, when there was no sleeve earlier, let's say 12 years back, 14 years back, only RYGB, because there was a JJ leak which could never be picked up by imaging, laparoscopy was more liberally used. So,
Yes.
in fact, there was no investigation done. Whenever the pulse rate reached 120, they would go in and scope because there was no way of knowing a JJ leak.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
but in
Okay.
now we have more of sleeves, and with these two complementary investigations, we almost have do not require a diagnostic laparoscopy to diagnose a leak, except in one case in our early experience. In fact, that case also did not have a leak, just a small collection which led to fever, but there was no leak. There may be a micro leak. So both these investigations can actually, in my our own experience, have been able to diagnose all the leaks. Uh,
Okay.
okay, so both combined almost has a, let's say, sensitivity of 95 to 100% in our own experience.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so this is about two. Now the point about uh, the endoscopic management. I think what you're saying about the stents, there is a lot of literature, and we can go one by one in the future topics.
Yes,
There
sir.
is obviously it's a controversial area, the stents, because some literature has also shown that uh, leak healing rate without stents is also equivalent. And so that is point number one. And before that, regarding the management, when you go in for operative management, always must do a feeding gymnostomy, whatever you might do. If you go in for a leak,
Okay.
there's no excuse of not doing a feeding gymnostomy. It is a technically challenging, but there's no excuse of not doing a feeding gymnostomy. If
Okay.
you find it difficult, then it's all right. It's technically, impossible. It's too bad. But if you go in, feeding gymnostomy is always a must.
Okay.
Uh, Regarding putting a suture on the leak, if the leak is more than 72 hours old, 48 to 70 hours old, then do not put a suture on the leak.
Okay.
Uh, Regarding the other therapies, I wish we could have more discussion maybe in a separate topic, because there's a lot of the VAC, EVAC you talked, endoscopic VAC system. That is now really come up in a big way, endoscopic VAC system and other endoscopic management like putting a T-tube and all that. I think maybe in a next topic we can have more literature based. This was an overview with a good,
Yes, sir.
good idea of what's happening. I think maybe we can have more stuff on endoscopic management in a subsequent topic. I think, but anyway, it's an excellent presentation.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other opinions and views, please?
Hello, Dr. Manav.
Ha, sir. Ha, sir.
I want to ask two questions. What is the difference between fully covered metal stand and partially covered? Is there any material over there?
Sir, actually, fully covered metal stand, I think it is completely. I think the composition of the alloy is different, sir. The metallic.
There is some porosity which is meant to decrease the migration rate. But in fully covered, there is some another
Fully covered
material.
will be more rigid and it will have a less migration rate.
No. Fully covered will have more migration.
Yes, sir. That is I am telling.
Yeah, fully covered will have more migration.
Sir, is there any material over covered?
I am not aware of the material used to cover the nitinol. The material of the stent is almost the same in most of the stents. The major improvement has been in the length of the stent. All these stents were made for, non-bariatric cases earlier, but because of the stent migration following sleeve, they started making longer stent which would fill up the sleeve. So there's no scope for migration. But the problem with putting a longer stent is the amount of discomfort and the reflux. That one major problem. And the side effects of stents are terrible actually. The initial reflux is very high. So it is not without problems. And the healing rate is roughly about 80%, which is almost the same as a conservative management. So a lot of people are not very happy with the stents, although some surgeon would say stent. I think a lot of other endoscopic therapies are holding more promise than the stent. And we need to, discuss that in future seminars.
Yes, sir.
Sir, one
But the
question.
covering
please.
material, I don't know. I don't know the covering material.
Okay, I will read it. But the how the argan plasma coagulation can lead to healing of leak site? By coagulation,
I don't think he was talking about leaks there. I think he generally took up the whole list of endoscopic procedures. I don't think
Sir, it was
APC can help.
including GI defects of perforations, leaks, and fissulas. All these
It
three.
how
combined.
perforation can be healed with coagulation? It will be
It
increased
is for bleeding. It is for bleeding.
bleeding.
The endoscopic gastric gastroplasty using the overstitch is also now being used more frequently to suture the endoscopic leaks. But I think the main game changer is the EVAC system, where you put, and also you do a septotomy. There is a septum which forms, and you go through the defect into the cavity because that's all localized. You wash it and put a EVAC system. I think that would be a game changer. And I think we need to discuss those things more detail with current, what are the current results and what is the current.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
Hello, Manav.
Hi, sir.
Uh,
Hello.
I want to comment on few things. First is the MGB. You have told that MGB is a high pressure system. Just I want
Yes,
to
sir.
that the LSG is the high pressure system and is not HOS system. Second,
Sorry, sir.
Amarjit, your voice is not clear. Your voice is not clear.
hello. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
LSG is high pressure system, not MGB. MGB is not a high pressure system. You have mentioned that MGB is a high pressure system. That's why I need correction. And
Sir, it was taken from a literature. They said that it is having less complaints and a high pressure system.
No, Tamar, it is relative.
Relative.
From RYGB it is less, but sleeve is less, but from over normal percent is high. No? I think it is a relative comparison.
Relatively high. That is what they meant.
Or second thing I want to comment, the conservative therapy is a high success. There is not high failure.
When it is used alone, that is what I found in some papers.
No, that is our experience. We have used it alone. Unfortunately, we had one mortality initially when we were totally inexperienced, and a second mortality which was almost going home. So it has sort of spoiled our data, but then obviously you can't say no. So we have whatever leaks, all of them healed except these two, and unfortunately these two died. So otherwise, had we been able to save this last patient, Sharmila, that would have been right. But I think conservative management has a high success rate. And the important thing is to rule out a distal obstruction on an initial GI series. When you do a gastrographin, also look for obstruction distally because that has to be corrected then.
Yes.
For the comment on the metallic stent, the fully covered stent prevents ingrowth of tissue, so it is a high chances of migration. But in partially covered stent, there is a ingrowth of tissue. There is a less chance of migration, but removal of the stent would be more difficult. For the benign lesion like sleeve leak or post-variant,
You are not audible.
Amarjit, you are not audible. Your parts of what you are saying is audible, but 90% is not audible.
Sir, just I am commenting on stent, metallic stent.
Patients who underwent surgery, उसमें there was 22 had cirrhosis, and only 9 of the 18 patients with nodular liver had a collaborative biopsy proven stage 4 fibrosis.
No, he's talking about follow-up biopsies. He's talking about follow-up biopsies.
Follow-up.
Okay, I mean, if there's no follow-up biopsy, then we'll mostly be interested.
No, there were follow-up biopsies.
Follow-up biopsies.
There are follow-up biopsies, and we must report on them. But I think our paper would also focus on the improvement in FibroScan.
5 patients, cirrhotic group में 5 patients की follow-up biopsies हैं. And advanced fibrosis वाले में 7 patients की follow-up.
वही होगी 10 से 12. ठीक है, so we have fair number, I think.
Yeah, but the primary outcome measure will be the surgical outcomes. Right?
Yes, of course.
Complications.
Of course. But yes, but how our paper is a bit different from others is obviously our paper showing good results. Two, we have used
FibroScan के साथ
FibroScan as a marker also. I mean, in our earlier paper, and also we want to
Earlier
say
one.
that even follow-up can be done by a FibroScan. If you can find something in this paper, I'm not sure about, but just look at that whether FibroScan can be recommended as a.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir.
And
ठीक
so
है, so
लिटरेचर में सियाजो इटाल का पेपर है, they have done liver biopsy preoperatively 1 year, 5 years, and they are reporting no worsening in 315 patients.
No, I'm of cirrhosis.
No, not cirrhosis, general.
We're talking about cirrhosis. Look, here paper is very focused on, because that is the area. Look, everybody says bariatric surgery improves fatty liver. That's a given now. What is there? What we need to answer is whether we should be operating on cirrhotic patients. If you look at Kamal Mawar's paper, their practice is if they see a cirrhosis, they take a biopsy and pull out. And then they discuss with the patient. But a lot of papers have shown that cirrhosis improves. And our paper has a good number of patients now and showing that it's very safe. So safe efficacy, both safe and efficacious. And we should not be, it should not be contraindication as long as you have counseled the patient. And our counseling is based on FibroScan. Okay. So we are fairly confident of our FibroScan cutoffs, and we start counseling them that if a FibroScan finding LSM crosses some certain cutoff, we say, okay, you can have a bad liver, either a severe fibrosis or advanced fibrosis, and this is what we might expect, and we will do a sleeve in cases even if a bypass is planned. So our focus, and also Aditya, should be the procedure of what procedure should be done and why. And Kamal's paper covers it very well, the review,
Yes.
but we need to broaden it with more literature.
But so do we have data, anything other than sleeve in
No, we
cirrhotics?
had two or three procedures we did in which cirrhotic was not suspected and only biopsy showed it, and I think they had a poor outcome. I think the two cases of worsening, or three, one is due to continued alcohol intake, and two others were bypass procedures. So there's some hint, and obviously it's supported by literature, that bypass procedures should not be done in cirrhotics.
Yes.
Or a bad liver. In fact, even in F3, because it may lead to worsening.
Yeah.
So just go through all this. So this is what I would like, and let's put it, it's really going to be a very good paper, which will help, practice in some sense, because a lot of people are still not clear about patient with cirrhosis.
Yes.
They will do. I've seen videos of senior surgeons, internal surgeons, showing videos of MGB in cirrhotic. They would show a video of MGB, some technique. The liver is looking like crazily cirrhotic, and they're doing an MGB. And then they say, oh, MGB led to malabsorption, and MGB led to, all that hypoproteinemia, which was in fact was due to cirrhosis. And this point is, I think I've always been raising that blaming it on MGB is wrong. It's bad. It's a bad liver. Chalo, ठीक है, good. We'll see each other tomorrow. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.